All right, let's go ahead and get started here. My name is Drew Humphrey, and I'm really excited to be with you all. I serve as college pastor at Highland Baptist Church in Waco. I came to Waco as a 17-year-old college, or 18-year-old. I wasn't that smart. An 18-year-old college student that was 17 years ago now. So I've almost spent half my life at Highland in the college ministry, either as a student, serving on staff in the youth ministry, in the worship ministry, and now for the last 10 years in college ministry. And so, I mean, this place has literally raised me. You know, it was the church that, has taught me a lot. I joined the college ministry, to be a part of it. In fact, Trey Eder was on the college staff there as the associate college minister for many years prior to me becoming the college pastor. And then when I became the college pastor, Trey was the associate. And I just said, Trey, just do everything for this first round of trainings. And like, how do we do this? How do we do that? And he was just kind of one who helped me to kind of bridge into that role. And so really thankful to be able to, have seen a lot of different ways to do this topic, large group gatherings, both at my church, even over the last 10 years that I've led. It's not just that we started leading it one way 10 years ago and we've just stuck through it the same way. We've had a lot of transitions. Right halfway through my 10 years was COVID, which gave us a lot of opportunity to change things rapidly. And so just before we get into all this, just be aware that, it may not be, you might be kind of downloading a 3-year transitional plan, more than 3 months from now, we're going to do everything different, kind of a thing. But maybe the calling here is to make some tweaks. I also want you to know my goal is not to just say, here's what we do at Highland, and you should do this. That's actually not the point of this teaching. If you, just cards on the table, what we do at Highland now is we do a monthly large group gathering. But I know that many of you either already lead weekly gatherings or you're starting to build out a weekly gathering. And I'm going to talk a lot about why you should do that. And then if you're kind of in the maybe more monthly or once every 4 to 6 weeks range, we'll talk about why you should do that. Prior to COVID, we had a weekly gathering. So really, I've experienced kind of both of those types of worlds. And every church is a little bit different. So that's who I am. I'm married to Holly. We have been married for 11 years. We have 4 kids. One of our favorite babysitters moved to Oklahoma last year, Madison, and her mom is back there in the corner. And so, really thankful for all those Baylor students who have carried us through it, babysitter-wise, and prayed us through it. We do pay well, and so that's why I think she kept coming back. And so thankful for you guys and your time, and I hope your first session went well with whoever you were with. And I'm going to pray for us, and then I'd love to just quickly kind of go around the room and hear your name and just kind of where you're from, essentially, in a ministry location. So I'll pray. So Lord, thank you for this time that we have together. Thank you for this conference. Thank you for the opportunity just to learn hour by hour across various topics. And Lord, we just pray that for each one of these hours, including this one, Lord, that you just give us maybe 1 or 2 takeaways, that perhaps it's not an instant install, but it's just something that we're considering, we're praying through, we're talking about together, Lord. So thank you for the opportunity to do that now. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so quickly, I'd love to hear your name and where you're serving. So you can tell me, like for instance, my name's Drew. I serve at Highland Baptist Church in Waco, Texas. Or if you're an on-campus ministry, give us the name of that ministry and tell us where that is. So we'll start down here with Case, and we'll kind of just zigzag through the row. Yeah.
My name's Case Smith, and I serve at First Woodway in Waco, Texas. Mm-hmm.
Name's Trey Eder. I serve at the Well Community Church in San Marcos, Texas.
I'm Corbin Parker. I'm at Sagemont Church in Houston, Texas.
Good. Elijah Martinez, same thing, Sagemont Church, CW,
Good.
Houston, Texas.
Good.
I'm Avery. I serve at Greenwood Baptist Church in Weatherford.
I'm Grant. I serve at Greenwood in Weatherford.
My name's Ty Hirsch, and I am also at Greenwood.
Good.
I'm Riley. I'm at Brazos Fellowship in College Station. I'm Cameron, and I'm also at Brazos Fellowship in College Station.
I'm Lori. I serve with the Christian campus community at UNT.
Great. Yes.
I'm Jacob. I serve at University Heights in Huntsville, Texas.
Yeah.
I'm Kathy. I serve at Calvary Baptist Church in Longview.
Good.
I'm her husband, Joe, Calvary Baptist, Smallview.
Great.
I'm Lindsay. I serve at Redeemer Church in Lubbock, Texas. I'm Campbell. I go to First Baptist Georgetown, right outside of Austin.
I'm Aaron. I serve at United City Church in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Johnny. I serve at Connect College Ministry in Fort Worth.
Great.
I'm Tom. I serve in First Baptist Edinburgh in South Texas.
Yes.
Abram, First Baptist Edinburgh, as well too in South Texas.
David, Oakland Heights Baptist in Longview, Texas.
Awesome.
Jackson. I work at Henderson Hills Baptist Church in Edinburgh.
I'm Brandon, I also work at Anderson House in Edgewood.
I'm Jenny Hatchell, and I work for IMB, and I live in Dallas and attend Northway.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I'm glad that we could, get to know all the places and people. This is going to be a little bit college ministry coded, but I recognize that a lot of churches are doing college ministry and young adults together, and that's totally fine. So if I'm talking about the campus, forgive me, because in my context, those are kind of two different worlds. But I'm going to do my best to do both those things, and it certainly applies a lot of the same things here. So what I want you to do just for the next 5 minutes is kind of, if you're with a group, you can talk together, or you can get with a partner. Just be with 2 or 3 people, whatever it is. And I want you to answer the question, how does your ministry do large group? So if it's like we don't do it at all, then that's a pretty simple answer. If it's we do it weekly or monthly, and kind of talk through just we're doing sermon series, just anything that comes to mind. How are you doing it? And then maybe even just kind of start to get into the question of strengths and weaknesses of your large group ministry. So you do it weekly, you do it monthly. What's a strong part about it, and what's a weak part about it? All right, so I'm gonna give you about 5 minutes to do that. I'll put some background music on for us, and then I'll get us back together.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah. No awkward silence. You can do it together. It's all good. Yeah, it's no worries. You can just kind of talk about strengths and weaknesses and kind of what other ones do. Yeah, bro.
Do y'all have like a Sunday school model too?
We don't right now. We have historically, and we're going to add one back this fall, but it's definitely not like this central core thing. It's more of like an equipping hour that a small percentage of our students take advantage of.
It's like our weirdest part, I guess. Like we have a Tuesday and weekly thing.
Yeah.
But then we have a Sunday school, but it's feels like an off-brand.
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes churches require that. In our case, when COVID hit, we had to stop doing our Sunday thing, and then we grew. By the time we got back, we couldn't go back to that model and didn't want to. And now we're adding it back because we just realized there is a gap where we need like a kind of a weekly equipping hour, just to be like, hey, let's do 3 weeks on dating. Like it's not like a mega series, but it's just like if you're trying to, or 3 weeks on evangelism, or that kind of stuff, to have a space for that. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's important to have both, but you want to treat them with different weights. That's kind of, otherwise you'll burn out. All right, go ahead and wrap up where you're at with all the conversations you're in. All right, so remember some of those strengths and weaknesses that you discussed, because at the end, if we have time, we'd love to have some kind of Q&A time, and it doesn't have to just be my voice speaking to that. Perhaps someone has a weakness or a conversation we bring up in this teaching time, and we can talk about it as a group. And certainly afterwards, as we go to lunch after this, if you want to come ask me a specific question, we can do that as well, because we have the room right after this. So really, if you're a note taker, go ahead and take notes. This is my only slide, okay? So you're welcome. Sorry, guys, I don't have any fancy other slides for you, but I do have a lot of content that I want to share and ask some questions. And so maybe it's just kind of one little note here or there that'll be inspiring to you. But so these questions, really, I've broken this up into 5 questions, and you can cat's out of the bag. It's the who, what, when, where, why, how, those kind of questions, but in a weird order. Okay, so I'm going to keep you on your toes a little bit. All right. So when we're talking about large group gatherings, obviously that's only one component of what you do as a ministry. But oftentimes it's the first thing we think about. It's sort of, okay, this is, maybe that's understandable. We'll talk about that in a minute. It makes sense that it would be kind of when you're meeting, when your staff team gets together, right? What's the first thing that you're thinking about? What are those, and oftentimes for most ministries, it's the next large group meeting. That could be 6 days from now, or it could be 30 days from now. But it often and it can become that, and that's not a bad thing. But that means that we need to be very careful about what this is, because it can actually cannibalize a whole lot of our attention. And for us, just something that happened at Highland was that we had a weekly meeting that was meeting prior to COVID, and I realized that about of 100% of our students, only 20% of them were coming to that weekly meeting within our church. They were involved in all sorts of ministries. They were in our small groups. They loved our Sunday gathering, but only 20% of our students were coming to the weekly gathering that we were putting on. But then when Trey and I and our staff team back then were meeting together, 80% of our attention was going to that thing that only was reaching 20% of the people, right? And that was a big problem. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we shifted to the monthly model. And I'll explain more of that for our context, why that was right for us, and it may not be right for you. But I think anything I'm doing with the staff team, I don't want 80% of our attention to be going towards something that only reaches 20% of our population. So that was a big why for us. And so really, that's the first question, is why. So if you're taking notes, you write down that first question of why. And really, I'm going to ask the question, why should you have a weekly large group gathering? So this is in the bucket of weekly, right? What are the weekly large group gathering whys? I would say that the main reason why you should have a large group gathering that meets weekly, I'm going to give you the opposite, as well, pros in a minute. So be ready for that. But if you are meeting weekly, or you feel you should be meeting weekly, it's a very, very strong front door for your ministry. It's super easy to invite people there. It becomes something that is predictable. It's a place that hopefully they know where it is. They mostly know what to expect. It's a great kind of hey, I'm new to church, I can come here, or I'm here every week. I think another reason a weekly large group gathering is really helpful is its consistency for a teaching voice. So that'll, especially if you're new in the role, or there's a new direction that you're trying to lead the ministry, it is a very, very wise decision to have that weekly gathering, because then you have week after week an opportunity to preach, to teach. It doesn't have to be you necessarily, but there's sort of this direction that you get to have every 7 days instead of every 30 days. And so that's an important, and not just that, but it's weekly. It's a platform evangelism opportunity. We all know that's not the only evangelism opportunities we should have, but it is a guaranteed space where if a student is wanting to invite their friends to hear the gospel, that they can be certain that one night a week they'll find that. So that's an important thing. And then one thing that I learned, again, being one who used to have weekly gatherings and now who has monthly gatherings, there's a lot of FaceTime with students when you have a weekly gathering. And one of the things that was lost when we went from weekly to monthly was that as the college pastor, I had a lot more time. I had a lot more time to go deep with students on topics, right? Obviously, I wasn't preparing for the next thing every 6 days, but I had a lot less time of those little moments, like walking by somebody, kind of like dapping them up, being like, how was school this week? Hey, how was the breakup? What are you doing this summer? All that kind of stuff. And interestingly, the place where I felt it the most was across the gender, right? So it's easy for me to kind of shoot a text to a college guy or to see a college guy. Like I'm discipling college men. But we have a whole staff team for the college women, right? Who are doing those things, or you might have a partner in ministry or whatever else, and maybe you don't. Maybe that is something that you're kind of managing as a solo minister, and that's totally understandable. But in our case, what ended up happening was I saw the ministry, the half of our ministry that was women, right? I saw them a lot less. And I didn't really get those updates. I didn't feel as connected there. And so that was sort of a con to going monthly for sure. And so I think that's something to think about. Do you have the infrastructure and the teams, if you're going to consider going from weekly to monthly, to meet that moment? Because you just don't have enough time to meet with students, even if they are the same gender you are, much less across the genders. That gets more complicated. I can take a group of guys to lunch. It's a little weird and probably inappropriate for me to take a girl to lunch, right? And so there's like complications with that compared to, hey, let's all meet on a Tuesday night and let's kind of like hang out in the lobby and talk. So that's something that I think is an important reason to have that. And I think it's especially valuable when you're new in the ministry. It was really easy. It was a lot easier for us to pivot into monthly in my 5th year than it would have been 5 months in, right? Because people knew me and there was like this kind of expectation of who the leadership is and what the voice is and all that kind of stuff. So that's the why behind weekly. Okay, now I'm going to give you why behind monthly. I use monthly loosely. You might be every 3rd week, whatever it is, but something that's not weekly. This is some things I've learned. It's more of a time to build momentum amongst your ministry. So if, let's say your ministry has 200 students in it, if you have a weekly gathering, I would guess that maybe 50% of them feel a sense of like, well, if I miss this week, I'll just come next week. It's always every 7 days. So there's that sense of like, if I miss one of the weeks or 1 week a month, that's fine. But when you have a monthly gathering, it becomes this kind of can't miss event that like, they will not go to their intramural practice. They will, skip their studying for that night or push it off or whatever else. They'll literally stop whatever they're doing to go to that, hopefully, because they recognize it to be a place that's spiritually, powerful in their life. They're able to fellowship. We kind of view it as like almost like a mountaintop moment, right? Where all these ministries and small groups and serve teams and everything have been doing stuff out in the community all month long. And then there's that one night a month we kind of ascend to the mountain together to seek the Lord, to be inspired, to be together. And then we kind of go back down the mountain again into all the various things that we've been doing. And so that's good because then it becomes a can't miss moment. Now, oftentimes people will, Case and I were talking about this, they might lock it in like last Tuesdays or last Wednesdays or first Tuesdays or first Wednesdays. And if that works for you, that's great. In my experience with young people, they don't know what they're doing this Tuesday, much less a month from now. And so what we have learned is that, and we learned this from an on-campus ministry called Vertical, who has to change their location every single week. So to even know where to go to Vertical, if you know Breakaway, it's kind of like Breakaway. You have to like go on their Instagram page or be on their emails to even know where their location is going to be. That college students really they're just kind of preparing for the next week of things. And so if you have a good communication strategy, if you're in that monthly side of things, then you really can do it on any night of the week you want based around what's best for your church schedule, your ministry schedule, the campus schedule, busy seasons. Oh, it's homecoming week. I definitely don't want to do it on homecoming week. That it's finals week. But it's like, oh, if I did first Tuesdays, well, now I'm stuck on that, and it's like the worst first Tuesday of the semester. So that kind of got sabotaged just because I called it that, right? So I think those are things that sometimes when you're thinking about what you call it when it's monthly, that's important because you want it to be can't miss. You want it to be loaded in such a way where you can select it and place it. And it also, another why for the monthly gathering is it gives you more time, right? More time to prepare for high quality ministry. Instead of a message every 6 days, after you finish a sermon the next day, you're already thinking 6 days from now I have to do that again. There's a sense of every 30 days or every 60 days if you're sharing that teaching load, you can do that. There's a sense of the worship team can be fresh and not exhausted. It's one of those your prayer teams, your serve teams, your budget. Instead of if you're spending money on cookies every single week, you now can spend money on cookies once a a month, and that's a 4 times of savings or to be used in other places on your budget, or it's 4 times more cookies, whichever one you want it to be. And so that's really important and helpful. And then, of course, there's also more time to invest into other things. As we mentioned, when you have a weekly gathering, there's this sense of every, 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, I'm on this sort of shot clock that's constantly going, right? Well, for us doing it monthly, what happens is we have this massive ministry moment of all this preparation and time in ministry and output. And then we get to have a couple of weeks of just ministering out of that. So it's like, hey, we had a conversation at the altar or afterwards, or this connect card came in. I now have space as a minister to either go minister to that student tomorrow, next week, or I can assign it to one of my teams. And then we're kind of starting to slowly ramp back up into what we're doing, right? And so then it's of course also more time to build out other things like small groups, prayer ministries, mission trips, evangelism groups, things like that. And so just to be clear, at Highland, what we do is we still have weekly ministry. They're just in small groups, right? So you're just kind of making a choice based upon those things. And so that leads me to kind of, again, while we're in this why section, which one should you choose, weekly or monthly? One of the things that I often think about is to base it. Here's why we base it off of. We based it off of is our Sunday morning gathering, the all church gathering experience. Now, I'm speaking in a church context, right? So I understand if you're an on-campus ministry, this will not apply to you. But if you're in a church ministry, is your Sunday morning worship experience that grandmas and college students and families go to, is that reaching college students effectively or is it not? I think that's basically the flow chart of your decision, right? Because if it is, if you're Sunday morning preaching from your lead pastor most Sundays and the worship and the communion or the baptisms or whatever's happening, if that's reaching young adults and college students effectively, they come to your church because of that. If that's true, and then you have a weekly service as well, you're doing something redundant, first of all, right? That's probably worse quality. It's like you're probably not as good of a preacher as your lead pastor. Your worship team is probably not going to be putting their A team both on a Sunday and on a Tuesday night or Wednesday night, right? So that becomes a reason to really reconsider, maybe we shouldn't do this weekly because we're already checking this box, not in a bad way, but in a good way. We want people to gather. We want people to come together to worship God, to open the Word of God, and that's already working with college students and young adults at our church. So we have to ask ourselves the question, why are we then doing it? I think just a lot of people, it's sort of an ego charge. It's like, well, I want to preach weekly. Like I want to be able to lead worship weekly. And so that's why we're doing it. That's not a good reason to do that, and so that's not really your calling in that role. On that same flow chart though, if it's like, hey, when we really analyze our Sunday morning experience, our college students really tolerate it more than they love it. They're like, hey, yeah, it's like the preaching's okay, the worship's okay, and like the 50 plus crowd love it, the 30 under crowd, is just kind of tolerating it, right? Well, if that's the case, then you have a front door problem, right? That's not something that people are inspired to bring their friends to, that they're inspired to never miss. And so now you probably have a really good reason to have a weekly gathering, and so that's the Highland story. When I was in college, and over the years, over the last 25 years, there have been seasons where we had kind of the Sunday morning experience would have never reached a college student. And so they had to have their kind of own version of that every single week, and they reached a lot of college students. And then about 15 years ago, we hired a pastor and brought in some worship team that we still have a lot of grandmas, we have a lot of families. Like we didn't just go only for the college students, but it was working with college students. And so then we pivoted off of the need to have that redundant, lower quality gathering. And again, it opened up all sorts of space in our life to do other things and to get other things healthy. And so I think that's probably one of the best ways to answer that question. The reason why we did it is because I started looking at places like Passion Church and some of these other churches, and I was like, what are they doing for college ministry? And I noticed because their Sunday morning experience was so effective at reaching young people that none of them had a weekly service in addition to that. They all had monthly or some other kind of strategy. So that's why we did that. And that may be why you shouldn't do it right there. And you don't have to tell me what you think about your lead pastor and main worship team, but you know in your heart. Okay, so an analogy that I often use is like a solar system. Okay, I want you to think about your ministry like a solar system. I'm not a scientist, but I know that whatever is the largest mass in your solar system, the sun everything else is going to orbit around that largest mass thing, right? And so there's all sorts of other things in the solar system. There's, different planets. You've got big things like Jupiter and Saturn, and they have like an impact on the asteroid belt. And there's still other things that are impacting the orbit of other things. But there's this center piece in every solar system, And whatever the greatest mass is, that's going to be what everything else orbits around, right? And so you need to answer the question, what do I want to be the greatest mass in my college ministry solar system? It's a decision you get to make. I think naturally we instinctively choose a large group gathering, right? Like that seems to be the thing. And if you have a weekly large group gathering, I don't think there's any way around it. You're not going to be able to not make that the largest mass in your solar system. It's always going to be the number one thing, and that's not a bad thing. Again, I've given you a lot of reasons why it's a good thing. But it is going to be extremely hard to get as much small group momentum as you want and as you probably desire. It's going to be hard to have students serving as much as you want or other kind of extra things, maybe leadership development, evangelism groups, prayer groups, because for them, every 7 days, this massive, solar system event happens where it's like everything else is swirling around the reality that every 7 days I have this gathering that I really like to go to. And so anything else is an addition to that. It's a smaller mass in my life. And so that's a question that I think it's really important to think through. For us, I think if you shift to the monthly gathering, then in your college ministry solar system, it becomes like Jupiter, right? Where it still has an impact. Like, again, our monthly gathering still is a very large item in the solar system of what we do, but it's not the center thing. For us, the center thing instantly became small groups. If you wanted to be in the college ministry at Highland, and you say, well, what do I do every week? It's like, well, about once a month, we do this big thing called college nights, but every week, college students are in small groups, and so that could be a whole nother breakout, and probably should be, of like, how do you grow a small group ministry and those types of things, right? And so you need to be prepared for that. If you're choosing a monthly gathering, it's like, well, then what is the weekly thing that people are doing? And how healthy is that? Are we prepared for the solar system center gravity to shift to something else? And what will that thing be? Otherwise, you may just start to deflate your ministry by meeting monthly because there's not another place for them to go that's in a healthy, growable, scalable place, right? And so these are all like, there's dominoes that impact each other, right? Which is why it's important to be thinking about that. So kind of think about it as a solar system. Another illustration is a conduit, right? So a conduit is just like a pipe, it's kind of like from one thing, it sort of passes water or passes something through a pipe from one place to another. That's a conduit. And so I think when you think about these opportunities in these large group settings, hopefully you're trying to do everything you can to not make this the end of all things, but it's the beginning of all things. It's like the launching pad. It's the conduit. It's the means to a greater end. And just experientially in my life, the more that you have a weekly gathering, the harder it is to propel things into the next degree of what you're trying to get students to do, whether that's join a small group, lead a small group, be in a prayer group, be in evangelism groups, be on the summer mission teams, all those kind of things. You can promote all that, and you have a weekly opportunity to promote all that, but there's just only so much gravitational mass in a person's solar system to be able to take it all in and have the space to do all that kind of stuff, especially if hopefully they're serving in some other way. They're serving maybe on their campus, maybe they're in the preschool ministry, serving in the youth ministry. They're kind of already tapped out. And to be honest, it's not a bad thing. They like your preaching. They like your worship. Like that's so they're telling you, they're communicating with their feet. Hey, like we like this on Tuesday nights. That's a good thing. And so I think that actually becomes really difficult to adjust. If something's working, but then you realize, hey, actually the thing that's working is sort of stopping everybody from going to the next thing. That's a really complicated thing to solve because all of your bosses and all of your heart and your mind is going to be like, well, this thing's working. So like we should just keep doing this weekly gathering, right? Instead of, and maybe there's a reason why you should not. Maybe so, maybe not, depending on how the context of your church is. All right, so that was why. Who? Here's the next question. Who? Some things that I think about, some tips, tricks, questions about who. A question would just be, is this mostly freshmen and underclassmen, or is this something that people go to for all 4 years? Or if you're in young adult life, is this something that people come to right when they enter the workforce, but then within a year or two, they're drifting off? And so this is just going to ask and be able to answer some questions of like, okay, well, that may not be a bad thing. That just means it's going to sort of tweak and code how you present content. What are you trying to communicate to young adults who are new or freshmen who are new, and where are those seniors and juniors going? Right? It may not be a bad thing that for instance, we have an on-campus ministry that we work closely with, Vertical. I already mentioned them. They've become a place where a lot of freshmen and underclassmen go to, and most of their upperclassmen don't go to it anymore. And they've come to the place where like, that's not a bad thing. That's just like that we become a safe, trusted place for students to worship in those first year or two while they're trying to figure out where they fit, what church they go to. And then almost all those people who are really invested, some of them serve in vertical in those upper years, and many of them do. In fact, this guy here, Ryan, is like one of their main leaders on campus. He's also leading at Highland on a college night. He'll be one of our residents this next year. So there's still upperclassmen who do that. But for the most part, they're finding their juniors and seniors are integrating into church ministries or into other ministries, and that's a good thing. That's not a negative thing. But if you've got a ministry that's obviously impacting all four groups, that's totally different, because you're talking about different types of content and conversations and retention and then release and all those kind of things that you're trying to do. Another who question: is this mostly bought-in Christians, or are there non-believers or new believers coming? When you analyze the room, and here's why. I grew up a pastor's kid who was called to ministry at 17 years old, was in worship ministry kind of in high school, so that kind of kept me in the church in a really close way. You might call me a church nerd, right? Like when I was the church nerd that, like, no matter what the church did, I was going to do it, You should not make your decision about a large group gathering based upon that group of people, because they already communicated to you, we're going to do whatever you tell us to do, right? You tell us to go to small groups, we go to small groups. Tell us to come to a large group, we go to a large group. So that's oftentimes the loudest group. It's oftentimes the group that's on your leadership team. And you should take their input. I'm not saying you should just totally, not care about their opinions. But on this topic, they've already communicated to you that we will do anything you tell us to do because we're church nerds like Drew is, okay? And so I think that's just something that you need to be really careful of, is not letting the person that would do anything anyways be the reason why you're doing something. Again, when I talked about the whole 20% of our ministry was a part of the thing we were doing, it was the church nerds. I mean, yeah, we'd had the spike weeks, people to come check us out, and they got integrated in various ways. They liked the church. They were experiencing Sunday morning, the preacher and the worship and all that, and they liked that. But ultimately, that group of 20% was pretty much students who, no matter what we did, they were going to come to it. And I did like being around them. I did like, preaching to them. I liked having more opportunity to be near them and to ask them questions. We had donuts and all the things. We had a donut wall, actually, where we had someone build us a wall of donuts, And so a lot of like fun culture things that happen in those moments. But ultimately, that group, when we went to monthly, they all went there and they were fine. It's like, because that was the group that was going to do whatever we did. So I think that's a good question. And then what about those who aren't as inclined to come? That barrier for entry, is it something that is a positive? And again, some of the fastest growing ministries reaching unreached students, not just the church nerds like me, but reaching unreached students and reaching unreached young adults, meet every week. So I don't want you to hear me say that if you meet every week, you're not going to reach people every week. It's just a question of answering. These are questions you need to ask about your context and about your style and about your strategies, because oftentimes I think we just do things because we've done them, or do things because we think we're supposed to do them, and that isn't always a good reason when you start to actually audit who's coming to the room and who's staying in the room for multiple weeks, multiple semesters, hopefully multiple years. And then a big who question is who's going to serve, because if you do something weekly, you have a 4 times a month, 30 times a school year, probably 45 times a year if you're a year-round ministry, like a young adult ministry or something. Weekly at that amount is a lot, right? Because you're talking about who's going to, yes, preach, but more than that, who's going to be on the worship team, and who's going to be on the setup team, who's going to be on the teardown team, who's going to be on the response team, who's going to be on the production team running the slides and doing all that, who's going to make the sermon graphics that you're going to have to do 4 times more often, right? Who's going to do all those types of things? And maybe you have the army to do it, and that's great. But oftentimes we decide we're going to do something weekly without having any of that infrastructure. And now we're overextending ourselves, which creates a worse product, which means that you're going to have less people coming and they're not going to be inspired to invite their friends. And it's all because we didn't really ask the question at the beginning, who's going to do this with me? And so just be careful as you're starting something, as you're leaning into something in a more kind of aggressive way with a weekly ministry, aggressive in the sense of commitment. It's an aggressive commitment. And so in that case, I'd probably want to have really high, clear bars. Like if you're going to be on our leadership team, on our serve team, this is like how many times you can miss in a semester. It's not just like, hey, I'd really love for you to be a part of it, but it's like, we need you here 85% of the time or whatever else. And you can use those quote unquote skips strategically, but you're going to get worn out, and that's going to be problematic if you're doing that weekly. And it's still true if you're doing it monthly. You want to have that, the same level of quality. And it's just, hopefully that means you have more people who are willing to serve because they're not doing it every 7 days. And so that's the who section. So we've now done why and who. Let's go to when. So when is a question of, sometimes it's your church, right? So think about like Sunday school model, like, is that like, for us, when Trey and I were doing the stuff together weekly, it was on Sunday mornings, adjacent to our college gathering, right? Adjacent to our family worship gathering. So it's more of like Sunday school, on steroids, basically, in that sense, right? Tables, we weren't trying to do worship, all that kind of thing. Going back before that generation, we had weekly college services, that happened every single week with worship and preaching and altar times and all that kind of stuff. But you might be in a Sunday school model, or you might be in this kind of service model. And I mean that like a worship service, like we've already described. You might be trying to do both. And we were just talking about that a minute ago, where there's a sense of, and so I think if you're in a church where it's like, hey, we have to have a Sunday school thing, or we want to, maybe we don't have to, but we want to, you can need to be careful how much, how big is that planet in your solar system, right? As compared to the other one. The people who will get burnt out, and you can't promote all these things and get students and young adults to come to all these things. So what ends up happening is you're like, we have this Sunday thing, and we have this weekly Wednesday thing, and we have small groups, and we want you to serve. And they're just like, I'm not going to be able to do all that, right? And so then you're going to start kind of deflating and diluting where people can go. And so I think just being, and again, some of them may be requirements. Your boss may be like, you have to have a Sunday morning, Sunday school-like thing, right? And so in that case, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out, how do we make that different? How do we make that attractional, not in a negative way, but in a way that's helpful to the overall system that we're doing. But when is an important thing. Of course, which night of the week? Here's something I think about: the other ministries in town. Like if there's other things that are really effective and working well on a Wednesday night or a Monday night, then I'm not going to do Wednesday or Monday night. Definitely not out of the gate. So I'm going to look for a Tuesday or a Thursday, or vice versa. The other ministries in town are doing on Tuesdays, especially in a college ministry context. Young adults are probably going to be reached via the church that they're associated with. So it wouldn't matter too much if you were both on a Tuesday night in a young adult setting. But in a college ministry setting, there's oftentimes, hopefully, a healthy relationship between on-campus and the church. And therefore, you want to be careful not to be overlapping any of those places as best as you can. And so it's not always easy to do, and it's sometimes not even possible. But I think being really strategic about when. Another example is like, for us, we don't do our first college night of the school year until the second week of school, because we want to have maximum amount of time and momentum to build up, to train our leaders to be ready to go. So we wait until week 2 to have our launch college night. Also, that first week is filled with all sorts of commitments. Every sorority, fraternity, everybody's hanging out with their friends. Everybody's getting, freaked out by their syllabus, and so kind of like by the second week, it's like, okay, I kind of have figured out my life a little bit. I've had 1 weekend or 2 weekends here now. And oh yeah, we have college night the second Wednesday of the school year. Like, that's a can't miss night for me, and hopefully that's what students are communicating. We've had a couple of Sundays, when you're thinking about, the when, you can think about the preceding weeks. Like, what are we doing to connect to students we haven't met yet? Are we on campus at all? Are we doing any of the the reach kind of events where it's like, popsicles and pickleball and puppies, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, come on out here and let's get contacts, that kind of thing, whatever the creative things are that you try to reach people in. Or even just simply like, could you invest into like a gift for that first month of the semester? So it's like, hey, if you come, maybe you could convince your pastor to say, hey, for the first month of the semester, if you're a brand new guest here, we have a gift for you. And it's going to be right out front in the lobby, or we're going to have this kind of special tent thing outside, whatever it is. And again, it's not an expensive gift. It's mostly just a lot of fluff in a bag and then like a little tiny cheap gift in there. But it gets them there. It gets them talking to a leader, a minister, hopefully a volunteer. And it's sort of it's a deal of like, hey, why don't you fill out this Connect card for me? The next day, they're getting a text from our college staff team. Hey, I hope you're coming to college night next Wednesday night. We'd love to have you there. It's sort of, we're moving them through the system of invitation. They get to that college night. Hey, by the way, we don't do this every week. We do this once a month. Here's how you can get involved once a week. We've got our CG leader, our small group leaders are here tonight. When you leave, they're going to be out there holding up their signs, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, all that kind of stuff. Go shop, right? Go find you a group, right? We're going to be back here in a month. You need to jump into a group for this month, right? So you're just kind of funneling new people through that. It's not just magically people going to show up, and a social media $10 ad, may get you 1 or 2 people, right? Kind of paying Facebook $10 may get you a couple people. But if you can be really intentional on campus, on Sundays, in the community, And then it's not just getting their information or giving them a gift. It's actually sending them a message, a personalized message. Hey, we're so glad that you joined us. I got to meet you at popsicles and puppies and pickleball and whatever we had. And we'd love to see you join us at this thing, right? Those kind of follow-up, handoff things are really important. And they do impact the win because you need time to do all those things. If you're doing that on the second night of the school year, it's really hard to meet people before that moment happens. So just think about that. All right, fourth is where. So where do you want to do it? On campus? If you want to do it on campus, you probably want to become a student organization. Anybody a church-based ministry that is a student organization as well? Okay, so a handful as well, because that's great. So I think that's really important. That's also hard. That's difficult. That's an added layer, but I do think it's a valuable thing to do. I don't have expertise in that, but if you saw somebody raise their hand near you, I would go talk to them if you're wanting to do that. I think that's a helpful thing depending on your context. Or then at your church, right? What's the best venue in your church? You may have big eyes, to have it in the main sanctuary, but you've got, 30 people coming. That is probably not the best place to start that, right? And so is there a smaller venue that you can put a lot of intention into? You're not just, throwing something together. It's like, how do we make this space an inviting space for 30 people? That would maybe one day be 100 people and we have to grow into a new space. And just kind of taking those steps. Also thinking through your partners in ministry. Who's on your facility team? Or on your administrative team, who's going to be the person that's mad at you for not taking out the trash? Who's going to be the person that's frustrated at you because you didn't lock that door, right? So you're thinking through all those kind of things when you think about where. It's really important. I always want to, as always, leave a place better than we found it, and not just out. You think about, we're going to do it in this room. Well, if we do it in this room, that means every single week we have to change the seating, right? We have to now put in tables or take out tables or set up 1,000 chairs or take down 1,000 chairs. There's a lot of reason why you might not choose that venue if you knew that, if you really thought through that on the front end, right? Some people I know do off campus, like they'll make a church member maybe has like a venue, like a restaurant or kind of a wedding space or something like that, a reception hall, and you could maybe use a space like that in downtown, something cool. So just be thinking through the where, don't just make it a default place, be intentional about it. And then the fifth and final one, which is where we'll have some specifics, is emerge. It's what and how. So what are you doing and how are you doing it? Is really these questions. And so I've just listed off some things that have been helpful to us, things I've learned over the years. And then after this section, it'll just be a Q&A time. And so we have lunch here in about 15 minutes or so. So these are going to be rapid fire. I don't really have these in any particular order. But one of the most important and critical things for us has been a response card. So every single college night, every single seat has a college-specific response card. And you just make it yourself. You could cut it out on the church printer or find a cheap printer. But the normal stuff of what's your name, what's your phone number, what's your email, what school do you go to, or your age, if you're a young adult, whatever it is, birth date, you can list on there so you have an idea of like how old this person is. And then a lot of questions like, do you have questions about Christianity? Do you have questions about baptism? Are you looking to join a small group? Would you like more information about serving or becoming a member of serving at our church, becoming a member at our church? And then, but the most important box is other, and it's the biggest box. Because what I've found is at the beginning of all of our gatherings, whoever's hosting at the beginning, we'll pull out that blue card and say, everybody should have a blue card on your chair. Just if there's anything that's said tonight, it could be a sermon point, it could be a song lyric, it could be one of our announcements, right? Where we're talking about, we want to go on spring break mission trip, or how do you get connected to small group? All you got to do is just write in that little box what it is, what your issue is. Do you have a prayer need? Do you have a struggle? Do you have a heaviness that you really don't want to show up and talk to someone about in front of all these friends, but you'd be willing to write it down? And then they just, at the very end of the gathering, we remind them during announcement time, and we say, just leave it in your seat. Everybody's going to leave theirs. It's either empty or it's filled out. Doesn't matter. Just leave it there. And then we have a team that comes through and picks them up, sorts them out. And every single week, we have somewhere between 10 and 30 of those filled out, when we're having that. And some of the best gospel conversations come from those. Some of the best, people who give their life to the Lord are baptized. People who get integrated into our ministries and serving. Sometimes people will just simply write like, I'm struggling with suicide ideation, or I'm struggling with depression. I'm afraid of the afterlife. I'm afraid of death. Those are ones we got this semester. And they were feeling that. They were given an opportunity to write it down. And then a minister texted them within a few days or the next day, depending on the seriousness of what they wrote. And we were able to set up a time for ministry. And we didn't do that for a long time. There was a long stretch where we didn't have those cards. And we missed out on a lot of ministry opportunities. Because again, it's a conduit. It's a means to an end, right? It's the kind of thing that's like trying to connect to the deeper level of what you're doing. Response cards are so great for that. How are you doing? Just thinking about what are you doing and how are you doing the sermon series? and what are you kind of, or the pop-up kind of sermon series, you might say. So like in a monthly setting, it's really great because we can kind of have time to almost get a pulse check on the ministry and have time to pivot into it and get, feedback. And I remember right after COVID, when we had in the previous years had shifted into the monthly strategy, I realized that there were so many students that were struggling with isolation and depression and just mental health issues coming out of all that COVID stuff. And so we were able to just like pivot pretty quickly on into that. And so again, you could the positive to monthly is that you have a lot of time to get a pulse, to prepare, to kind of, and then also to minister out of that, right? Like it's not just here's a 30-minute sermon, but it's like here's all the ministry that kind of flows from this talk. I'm always like, hey, yeah, we want to. Who wants to be discipled? Everybody raises their hands, like, oh man, I didn't get any disciplers, or like purity. It's like you preach on purity. Like you're going to have some sort of back infrastructure here of like, what do we do when 100 people say, I'm struggling with pornography? Like, that takes space and time and ministry minutes and leaders, right? So that's helpful in a monthly. In a weekly setting, it's really nice because you can take a really complicated topic like mental health or purity and you can chop it up into 3 or 4 kind of things, right? So that's a good thing. So it's like you're kind of choosing your problems and choosing your pro in that sense. But think through that and what's best for your setting. And of course, now there's all sorts of other options, right? You could use podcasts if you do monthly. You could do YouTube. You could do kind of social media. You could just do a direct kind of text message, kind of system where it sends them a link to like, hey, if this sermon was helpful to you, here's a follow-up kind of 10-minute back porch, patio, kind of just conversation of things I wish I would have said if I had more time or if I had another week to talk about it. Again, thinking about what and how. Do not underestimate the worship quality. I remember Rick Warren was on the Carey Nieuwhof podcast many years ago, and they were kind of just going back and forth about church planting and churches and church health. And he said this thing, he was like, the one thing I didn't realize at the beginning was the most important, and probably, I think he said it this way, the most important thing that we either did well or didn't do well was who we selected to be the worship leader. And that's, yes, worship quality, but just from a ministry perspective and the ministry of that moment. Because he said, we could have the best preacher, we could have the strategic venue, we could have the perfect time, we could have the kids ministry, that's great. But that first impression of excellence and that first impression of the seriousness of the faith in that moment is going to always be the worship leaders. And again, there's always a room to grow. I'm really glad that nobody was hyper-analyzing me at 17 years old or 19 years old. And so we're not looking for everybody to be Chris Tomlin. Like I understand we're on a chart here, but I think sometimes we think about it as like the very last part of it. And actually most of the people who are coming to your gathering are probably making their decision in a huge percentage based upon that. It's just like, man, that was extremely cringy. That was extremely awkward. I felt uncomfortable when that person was saying those things or performing in that way or singing those songs. Or I felt welcomed. I felt the Spirit of God. I felt invited into God's presence, setting up the Word of God in the community. All of that is so critical. So don't underthink about that. And if you have investment opportunities, it may be where you're like, hey, it's easy. You might be able to find a senior in college that can disciple 10 guys for free for you and use that budget that you have to actually pay a little bit of stipend or something to hire someone to be a worship leader for you. It might be harder to find a worship leader than it is to find that associate discipler that's in your ministry, right? So think through the best way to use your budget, your time, your staff, all that kind of stuff. And all of that is dictated by how often are you meeting, all those types of things. So another one is just altar times. What are you doing in the altar times? That you can see, this is actually at the beginning of one of our gatherings. A host got up there and just called the room 5 minutes into the gathering, one song, then hosting, and just called the room to say, hey, let's not wait until the end. Let's just press in. And students just started coming forward with their friends and just began to pray. Of course, what do you do after the sermon? Do you have prayer teams and prayer leaders? And how are you managing that? Do you even have altars? Like our church, this is a flat wall right here. So there's no altars. So we ended up asking one of the members of the church to come in and kind of build some cushioned altars that were just right there at the front. So maybe your setting is like that. Maybe you're in a portable setting or in a room that doesn't have altars. Perhaps you could use a summer project and spend a couple $100 and build something that works for your setting, just to kind of draw people to respond physically to the Lord. Speaking of prayer, I was convicted about the pre-service prayer. So what I noticed was I had a worship team that was there 90 minutes early. I had a production team. I had a setup team. I had staff teams that were there an hour, 2 hours early. But we didn't have anyone there early praying. And so we started to build out a prayer team that would arrive about an hour before and pray for about 45 minutes or so. Oftentimes we'll start together in a room like this, and we'll begin just kind of praying in a group, just praying for the night, maybe listening and just kind of stilling our heart before the Lord, reading scripture, just kind of getting our space, getting ourself focused on the Lord in that space. And then we'll move into wherever the worship is going to happen, and we'll begin to pray over every seat. We'll begin to pray over that space, begin to pray over the night. Because if we're going to prepare in worship and prepare in the setup of the room and prepare in all those other things, it's important to prepare there. And so I know Stanton Corley, who's here, he's done something where he has that prayer team go and pray over one specific seat. Like, they don't know who's going to sit there, but they just pray over one specific seat. And then when the gathering starts or when it ends, that student will go to that person and say, hey, what's your name? I prayed for you just an hour ago. You're sitting in this seat, right? So something like that, that's just, you don't have to do every seat, but maybe just let the Lord lead people and see what happens from that. As I already talked about, it's really important to have strong communication strategies. So, do you actually have everyone's email? By the way, college students and young adults don't like email. So, it's like you probably need it, but that's like the lowest, hit rate in terms of open rate, right? And then do you have group meets? Cool. Well, like some people just turn your group me off, right? Do you have a text messaging platform that you can text? Or maybe you have a ministry. Here's what I do. I just text our leaders. Even if you have 100 students in your ministry, just text them individually. It's not that hard to copy paste a thing of hey, Johnny, hope you come tonight, praying for you. If there's any way I can help you get connected, any way, that kind of thing is personal. It doesn't have to require paying some platform to text people in a mass text setting, right? And so you might want to have one of those, but just think through, how are we communicating 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, 3 days out, 2 days out, depending on if you're doing weekly or monthly. And then asking questions like, how often should the ministry leader teach? One of the things that was lost when we went from weekly to monthly was that it meant that a lot less people had the opportunity to teach and preach. And that was important both to have other voices, but reps, right? I remember when Trey and I were doing that together, Trey would, over the course of a semester, oftentimes teach that 2 to 3 times, if not more sometimes, of the 12 that we had. I would probably do 6 to 8. Trey would do, somewhere in the 3 to 4 range. We'd have a couple other people do it as well. As soon as we went to monthly, that became really hard to do. In fact, almost impossible to do. Maybe, had Trey been on my staff at that time, it might have been like, hey, Trey, once a year, just based upon the way that this works, right? Or once a semester compared to almost once a month sometimes. And so I think that's something to think about as you're trying to raise up preachers. Doing it monthly creates a little bit of an issue there if you don't have another outlet for that. So again, those are the things that have been important to us, things I've learned. Why are you doing it? Why are you doing it weekly? Why are you doing it monthly? Who are you doing it for? When are you doing it? Where are you doing it? And then what and how are you doing when you're there? And so there's probably other things that I could have talked about, but those are some of the high point things that were sticking out in my mind. So just a handful of minutes, what kind of questions or do you guys have related to large group? Maybe it's something I mentioned, or maybe it's something you bring to the table right over here.
So you mentioned the band leader. So this past year we brought in a band because we didn't have a college pastor. But this next year we want to bring it back in a student-led band. Do y'all have a student that's in charge of picking out songs and assigning planning center to students? Or is it someone from the church or someone that's brought in to specifically
do all that
weekly nights?
Yeah, I think it just depends on your context. Sometimes you might have a church that has a worship leader that leads for the whole church, and then there's an associate, right? So when I was 22, I was the associate worship pastor at our church at that point. And so one of my responsibilities was to help coordinate worship for our college ministry, for our youth ministry, things like that. That's obviously awesome because it doesn't come out of your budget. Most churches maybe don't have that. So then it's before that, I was just a volunteer worship leader, right? And I was, at first, they were holding my hand, kind of helping me through that as a 16, 18, 20-year-old. But then the more that I gained trust and I kind of saw the ropes, then I was kind of choosing those things. The college pastor before me, when I was his worship minister before that in the college ministry, we would have a weekly meeting where he would talk about, okay, here's what I'm planning to preach on. Here's some songs that I think might work. Let's build out this kind of whole service together. Those are really important moments of learning for me, right? And so I think it probably depends on just who it is. I love the idea. If you can have students leading, that's a A++ decision. You want them to be spiritually prepared and musically prepared enough. You're not looking for everybody to be Chris Tomlin, but you won't have Chris Tomlins if you don't have people learning how to be a worship leader at 19 years old, right? And so there's a tension there, both in faith and in musicianship, that you have to steward and lead. And oftentimes as ministers, we just want to outsource it. We just want to go find the great worship leader who can take that off my plate, when actually we probably need to spend a lot of our time as ministers building someone up and training someone up, because it's such an important part. It's such an important part of what is happening in this large group gathering. So yeah, so both and yes and no is all my answers. So yeah. Yeah. What you got, Elijah?
I just thought maybe it's more for everyone also,
Yeah.
not just you.
Yeah.
I was thinking you were talking about the preaching part at the end. So we do a weekly service,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of thinking like, what y'all's thoughts of having like, I guess like a preaching team?
Mhm.
Like y'all have like a squad ready to go.
Yep.
Because I know you just talked about like if you're doing monthly,
Yep.
it's gonna be less for the main person.
Yes.
So because we're weekly, I don't know, like just like do y'all only let staff do it? Do y'all let students do it? Do
Yeah.
y'all let, I guess, other people if you're a college or a church based
Right.
ministry, do you let
Yeah.
other pastors in your church do it? Just y'all's thoughts.
Yeah. It's good. I think one of the topics actually of the breakouts is on this topic. So how to like raise up a teaching team. So Danny's doing that in these next two. So that would probably be a good one to go check out. And if anyone's interested in that, I've also seen people, especially if you have a weekly rotation, you might have a preaching team where it's like people rotating like on the platform, but even just like in the preparation, right? So Jonathan Bakluda at JP is in our town, and he does that with his whole team. Some of my best friends are on his staff, so I've learned about that. And it's like on Mondays, they all sit down and they kind of work together to kind of get some of the main outline and bones there. So then whoever's preaching is like kind of has a little bit of a head start, and then they preach it, 48 hours prior to Sunday on a Thursday, get some feedback, and so it does help you if you're preaching every 7 days, right? To have a little bit of, influence and have different voices. You could have old people, young people, in the room and speaking into, they may not be gifted in teaching, but they're theologically trustworthy, or they are someone who could speak into the teaching kind of output in that way. So that's a way to help as well. One more question we'll do. John?
How do you differentiate each gathering? Like, do you have different elements that you add? Like, whether it's obviously in content and obviously in songs.
Right.
But are you doing above and beyond differentiation that you're
Right.
ahead of time?
At the beginning, we spent a lot of money, time, and sweat equity on like a lot of the extra things, like the after parties, like the sort of like the sauce, that's on top of it. I think that might be necessary when you're trying to start something and trying to get some attention to it, but it's very expensive both in dollars and in just staff preparation. Like we would have spent, all day, all week preparing for this after party, and then it's like, oh yeah, now it's time to do the ministry of like worship and preaching. And so as soon as we identified a moment where we could be released from that, we stopped doing it, and actually most of our gatherings outside of the songs being different and the preaching, they're the same. And maybe it's like every now and then we have a cookie afterwards or something, but for the most part, it's like, hey, you're coming here for God. Again, you kind of build to that. You want to build that trust. One of the most important things in college ministry, I think, is having that reputation that you're trustworthy, right? And so that's one of the things that I don't want to ever lose, right? Because then it's like when Big Brother comes through and little sister comes through and my friend who's a couple years older than me, it's like, what are the 2 or 3 churches I should try? You want to be able to keep that, right? And so I think, if you didn't have that yet, that doesn't mean you did something wrong. It just means you might have to have some more attractional type things that bring people in, and that's a good thing. It just depends on what end of that spectrum you're on in terms of, do people know that you exist? And are you a trustworthy place where kind of like it gets passed down in a way? So I'll stay here. I'll let y'all get to lunch. And then there's other kind of, again, Danny's session might be a good one if you're thinking about teaching teams. And there's a lot of other ones that'll happen. After lunch is collab. Then we have another breakout. So you've got one more time. So appreciate y'all.